Hey guys, what's up? This is Fang slash VA here coming at you with a new video. And in today's video, I'm going to be discussing with you all on how I would handle bringing back the Freedom Fighters in the current Sonic content, most likely the IDW comics. Um, so before we start talking about that, I'm going to give you all a bit of a history lesson on them, especially if you don't know who the Freedom Fighters are. Although, to be honest, if you're a fan of the Blue Blur at all, you should kind of know who they are. Even if you may not know exactly who they are, you should know enough. um, so the Freedom Fighters are a group of Mobians that exist to free planet Mobius from the clutches of the evil Dr. Robotnik, or Eggman. You guys keep in mind, back during the 90s, um, in 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 the West, he was known as Robotnik, even though technically all this time his name was always Eggman, but over here, originally his name was Dr. Ivo Robotnik. Now, this group was led by the fearless Princess Sally Acorn. Um, and because of the fact that, with her being a princess, well, that means that, well, her kingdom was pretty much captured by Robotnik. And that was a big part of reason why they needed to get control from Robotnik back into the people's hands, especially since, in Sonic SatAM, Sally was looking for her father. Um, which if that sounds familiar, at least I at least I at least I'm hoping I'm correct on that. If not, there's probably gonna be a Chibi Mizu on the screen telling me that I'm wrong or right. Um, but their story in the show did not conclude. So after the first two season run, that's when we got our very first Sonic comic, known as the Archie Sonic comic series. Tonally, it took more inspiration from the very cheesy, very Looney Tunes expired. I say expired, I meant inspired Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Even though that design wise, um, a lot of it resembled, you know, Sonic Set AM. And like there's some designs of like, the games. There's some designs from Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog because the two goofballs from that series, Scratch and Grounder, the original Badnik duo, was also a part of it. And then later on, the tone shifted to become a bit more serious. When I got into it, it was around the my first comic was the very awesome 25 years later one, the future one, where it shows Sonic as king and he's married to Sally Acorn. The war's, at this point, the war is over. They won. Although Sonic's relationship with Knuckles isn't the greatest. Um, And I've told the story before, seeing Sally and, you know, Kn- Knuckles, Knuckles' wife in a certain panel. Yeah, that's all I need to say. Um, so the Freedom Fighters for a long time was a big part of the Sonic, you know, lore. Um, they're still fan favorites to this day. And the ship between Sonic and Sally is still like one of the most popular Sonic ships. And and of course too in the UK Sonic comics by Fleetway, they have their own version of the Freedom Fighters. Um, that own game character wise, they only had Sonic, Tails, and Amy. Everyone else was these different characters like Johnny Lightfoot was one of them. There were some others. They're escaping me right now. But with the version that we're all familiar with the Sonic Set AM version of the Freedom Fighters, it was Sonic and Tails as the two game characters. Sally Acorn, Bonnie Rabbit, Antoine D, Colette. Um, did I say Bunny yet? I'm pretty sure I said Bunny Rabbit. And Rotor slash Boomer. Why they gave him two different names, who knows? But with the Archie comics, it expanded and it included a lot of the characters that we all know and love from the games. Um, it also included some like comic original characters as well, and also too, there's a anti Freedom Fighters that is led by certain green hedgehog, who calls himself the king. Well, you all know who he is. I don't need to say his name. He's a character I voice. He's a character I will always be voiced on the channel. And interestingly enough, um, you can even say that the Freedom Fighters inspired the resistance from Sonic Forces. It's a very similar concept. These group of individuals coming together to rein back control of the planet from Eggman. It's a similar thing. Now, obviously, that's not the Freedom Fighters. That's not the Freedom Fighters we all want back. It might be inspired by it, but it's not the real McCoy. So, how would I handle if Ian Flynn and Sega came to me and wanted my expertise on how I would bring back the Freedom Fighters? This is how I would handle it. Number one, I would make them at least be hinted to be the same ones from the Archie comic canon. Um, if it's possible for time travel to exist, then it is possible that alternate universes could also exist. I mean, Sonic Prime kind of had a poorly developed version of that concept. Um, of these, alternate versions you know, of the cast, although there wasn't no alternate version of Sonic and Shadow. But, Blaze does come from a alternate dimension. So for this to work, like I said, I want I want this version of the Freedom Fighters to be hinted at to be the same ones from the Archie comics. Now, which part of the Archie comics? The bias in me says I want it to be before the Archie comics, stop being unique, where they got it to be more game accurate. To me, I will stand by this. The Archie comics was better before then. I liked the fact that it wasn't one for one with the games, unlike the IDW comics. I liked the fact that even though the Archie comics had some events from the games and they hinted at them, they had their own unique stories. Sonic had parents. Sonic had a girlfriend. You saw them grow up. And yes, all the time on Twitter, you're always seeing people throw shade at the weird art style and like, seeing Sonic. It's like, you know, what a lot of the newer Sonic fans, especially the ones that don't have a attachment to the Archie comics, need to understand is that the Archie comics was a large part of the Sonic fandom. A lot of those characters, actually, they still are quite popular. I mean, people got to remember the people that grew up with the Archie comics are the same ones that grew up with the old Sonic cartoons. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention too when it comes to the history of the Freedom Fighters, they also existed in Sonic Underground, but they did not feature Sally Acorn and all of that. But even back then, if I remember correctly, they were called the Resistance. They were not called the Freedom Fighters. And again, there's probably going to be a Chibi Mizu popping up telling me if I'm right or wrong. Now, getting back to my main point here, there's different ways that they can hint at this. Sally mentioned how she's in a complicated relationship with a certain blue dork from her timeline, or how Bunny and Antoine you know are are together, and like they can maybe drop like a reference to Scourge. Like how like if they were to meet Surge, they could be like, well, this one reminds us of one that's kind of worse, that actually was able to defeat our version of Sonic and Shadow with ease. And he also had a fox companion who was his girlfriend, and those two together was a very pain in the butt duo. There's ways they can hint at it without fully saying. Now, many people might be like, why are you focusing so much on Sally's and Antoine's and Bunny's, you know, love life? Because that's a large part of their character development. One of the core themes of Sonic Sat AM and the Archie comics was Sonic and Sally's relationship. It really was. Unlike with Son Amy nowadays, to where now there's starting to be more of an effort to maybe canonize it, a little bit. Back during Sonic Sat AM in the Archie comics, it was a definitive, Sally is Sonic's girlfriend, although in the Archie comics it was more on and off again sort of thing, you know, typical teenage drama stuff. but there was no question about it. Unlike with Sonic and Amy, it's more implied. Same thing with Bunny and Antron. The reason why Antron becomes a a complete, you know, different there the reason why he becomes more cooler during the Archie comics is probably because he had a great person that probably helped build up his confidence, that helped him, you know, get rid of his self-esteem issues. And in my opinion, having these versions of these characters be newer versions is a complete and utter ripoff, in my opinion. If you're going to bring these characters the ID in the into the IDW comics, you're catering to the fans around my age and older. Now, as for how things would be, well, it would be your, typical, maybe it could be like a 5-issue arc, at least have them be, you know, include them in the IDW comics for like short 5-issue arc, and after that, let them go back to their own timeline, and just use them from time to time, just so this way that their presence doesn't take away from a lot of the newer fan favorite characters. And heck, if Ken Penders allows them to, let there be one of the issues where Scourge comes in, starts causing trouble. And just in case people are wondering why there's so much fan service, is because is there really any other way they can do it? They know that we know these characters very well. And I'm sure most fans would probably agree with me in that we don't want new version of these characters. That's not what we want. At least that's not what I want. And just in case any people worry that Sally's presence there would ruin, you know, the game, the game canon slash IDW dip with Sonic and Amy, it wouldn't, because Sally would understand that this Sonic is a totally different Sonic. It's not her Sonic, even though there are, definitely, obviously, there are similarities, because of course, they're both Sonic the Hedgehog. And now, as for the villain, I just mentioned him. Bring in Scourge. Bring in someone else from the Archie comics I've ever seen, like Enerjack. Or heck, why don't you do like a full on um Sonic Sat AM tribute with this issue, and bring back the person that was supposed to be the villain of season 3, who later on shows up in the Archie comics as a villain. You all know who he is. Just in case you all don't, I'm going to Give me 1 second, you guys. Naugus. They can do that. Let the freedom fighters fight alongside the resistance. You know, it would be kind of cool to see, you know, the newer IDW characters work alongside the classic Archie slash Sad AM ones. And it would be this cool callback to what to it would be a good way to have both the 90 Sonic fans and the Sonic fans that might have grew up with them, well, that grew up with him during the, you know, let me rephrase that. It could be a good way that there can be peace amongst the two fandoms because the fact of the matter is, the one thing that I've gotten tired of being a freaking Archie Sonic fan is I've gotten tired of a lot of people throwing shade at it just because tonally a lot of it is totally different. And this could be a good way for maybe for them to acknowledge that, hey, the Archie comics are very important to us. And here's the thing, they are still very important to Sega because they acknowledge the Archie comics. When they did that whole like 1000 issue, something like that, like celebration. And in that, they also acknowledged the Fleetway comics too. They haven't ignored the Archie comics. Be- You know, I know it seems that way, but with them doing that, they still acknowledge them. It's just unfortunate that because of the copyright hell that's in, because of, you know, Sega owning these characters and Ken Penders owning these characters, they can't reissue the comics in a big omnibus style through IDW. Would be nice. Would definitely be nice. Because those comics are a big part of my they are a big part of my early Sonic fandom. And I would love to see the Freedom Fighters appear amongst the IDW cast. But I do not want them to be newer versions of them. A borderline parody of them. I want the Freedom Fighters that we know and love from Sad AM and the Archie comics. I don't want reboots. I want to be taken back to my childhood with those 5 issues, whatever how many issues they do, if they were to include them, and if it is the Archie comic versions. Some people may disagree with me. I know that, again, there's a lot of people out there that dislike the Archie comics. And for me, I say, you're missing out. I love them. I will always love them. I also love the IDW comics too, but I prefer the Archie comics. So that's pretty much how I would handle the Freedom Fighters. Is that I would just have this big old celebration to Sonic's comic past, and maybe they can have Sonic in those issues, you know, be like, let's do it to it, or it's time to juice and jam. or maybe have him do the whole, I'm waiting. I think that a lot of people around my age and older would definitely appreciate that. So, with that said, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and hit that bell button. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video. And of course, if you all want to have a discussion about this in the comments, sure, just keep it respectful. Don't be toxic. If you don't like the Archie comics, that's fine. Just remember, there are people that do. So yeah, have a good one, guys.